Okay, and welcome back to the final part of our conference. I'm really pleased to introduce Jean Christians and Clare Gibson, who are going to give, I know, a fantastic talk.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me. All right. My name is Jean Christians, and I'm the support coordinator at the London BEHÇET'S Centre of Excellence. Many of you know me. Sometimes, some of you might know me as the benefits lady, but my role, thought that might get a few laughs, the role of the support coordinator does extend far beyond this. Our team encourages and promotes living well with BEHÇET'S disease. When possible, we support our patients to stay in employment and education and to participate in activities that matter to them. Today we will be talking about adjusting and adapting to a diagnosis of BEHÇET'S disease. I have a background in recreational education and leisure studies and have a keen interest in empowering the lives of others through therapeutic activity. Whether it's physical sports or creative hobbies, recreation and leisure are important because they support well-being in many different ways: physically, psychologically, emotionally, and socially. I am often told by patients who come in to see me that living with BEHÇET'S disease can feel very isolating, but they still express a desire to get involved and have a sense of belonging. Sometimes it's a previous activity they want to rediscover, or sometimes it's trying to find something new. Today we have one such person to share her story with us about how she has adapted to her diagnosis and disability and found ways to keep moving forward and live well despite the challenges. I would like to introduce you to London patient Clare Gibson.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life over the last 20-something years. So I was diagnosed with BEHÇET'S disease in 2012 after initially being misdiagnosed with Crohn's 4 years earlier. Being diagnosed with BEHÇET'S in a strange way came as a relief, as I started to think I was going to be stuck attending hospital appointments, repeatedly coming away with another doctor telling me they had no idea what was wrong with me. It was actually my GP, who, having a rare condition herself, decided to do some investigating to link all the symptoms together, or as I like to say, put the pieces of the puzzle together. Like many patients, when she told me she thought I might have BEHÇET'S, I had no idea what it was or what it meant, and the rest of what she said in that appointment went completely over my head. As a combat medic in the army, I was highly trained to administer life-saving treatment in a war zone. But understanding a rare autoinflammatory condition is completely different. So I started searching the internet in the hope of finding out more about it. I know sometimes searching the internet is a bad thing to do, but for me, finding BEHÇET'S UK was an absolute game changer. The medical fact sheets provided a wealth of information and enabled me to understand my symptoms. And the biggest breakthrough was being referred to the London Centre of Excellence in 2014, and I have been under the excellent care of the fantastic team there ever since. I think the thing I struggled to come to terms with the most after diagnosis was how much my mobility had been affected. And in truth, the last thing I wanted to do was use a wheelchair, but it has actually given me my independence back. A question I asked myself a lot was, how can someone who has worked as a fitness instructor, been incredibly fit and served in the British Army end up like this? Before I joined the army, I hated running, but during my service it became a passion. I would think nothing of going for a run before and again after work, while most of my colleagues would go straight to the NAFI bar. I also loved all the sport I got to play and represented my regiment in numerous sports, including athletics and cross-country running, hockey, rugby, and even kayaking. After all, what's not to like about being paid for playing sport? Little did I know, when I joined the army in 1997, that there would be so much support available to me through military charities, including the Royal British Legion, Help for Heroes, and many others, even nearly some 30-odd years down the line. My biggest light bulb moment to regaining some of my pre-Behçet self was from reading a book written by a Royal Marine Commando who was the first UK triple amputee to survive from the war in Afghanistan. And Help for Heroes were instrumental in introducing me to adaptive sport. Archery was the first sport I tried, which led me to finding a club in my area where I could go and shoot numerous times a week. I then went along to a hand cycling event Help for Heroes were hosting along with a charity called Wheel Power and British Cycling at the Stoke Mandeville Stadium in Aylesbury, known as the home of wheelchair sport and the birthplace of the Paralympic Games. At first, powering myself with just my arms whilst laying almost flat was really, really difficult, but I soon was able to do a whole lap of the track without stopping. I think the thing I loved the most was the feeling of being free, and I certainly hadn't felt free in a long time. I was after that gifted a handbike by another veteran who had never ever used it. During the lockdown period in the COVID pandemic, my mental health was really, really impacted. So I started using my handbike set up on a turbo trainer in my garden shed. But keeping motivated was really, really hard. Then a veteran friend of mine told me about something called Zwift, which is an e-sport that enables you to ride virtually with others all over. You can ride in Italy, France, but you can do it together, which is really, really good. So that then led to me taking part in the Bike for BEHÇET'S Run for the Rare and Heroes Ride fundraisers. It's bonkers to look back at that time as I hand cycled over 3,000 miles that year without even leaving my garden shed. Help for Heroes organise community sports weekends around the country, which is how I got into playing wheelchair basketball. I now train and compete in league matches on the Help for Heroes team. Wheelchair basketball is the biggest Paralympic sport in the UK. And if you're interested in trying it, you'll find a brilliant network of clubs on the British wheelchair basketball website. Most clubs have a pool of chairs, so you don't need your own chair to have a go. You also don't need to be a wheelchair user to play wheelchair sports. Sports chairs are actually incredibly expensive. And I'm incredibly grateful to Jean for helping me source funding, enabling me to get my own made-to-measure basketball chair. Voila. And I'd also like to say a huge, huge thanks to BEHÇET'S UK for part funding the chair, along with Help for Heroes and the Bruce Wake Charitable Trust. The biggest military sporting event for wounded, injured, sick, serving personnel and veterans is the Invictus Games, founded by Prince Harry, established after the first Invictus Games in London in 2014. Do you know what? I had never considered applying to compete. I was told about a Veterans Multi-Activity Week run by the Royal British Legion at the Battleback Centre in Lilleshall and thought, actually, that sounds quite good. In October 2021, I attended the week-long course, and what a week that was. The staff are so good at what they do, and with their encouragement, I managed to climb to the top of the indoor climbing wall. At the end of the week, I was told I was actually eligible to apply to compete in the Invictus Games in Dusseldorf. Sorry, I've got myself lost. So during the latter end of 2022, I attended training camps where I got to try a range of adaptive sports, including wheelchair racing, sit-in volleyball and seated throwing. The next stage was to submit a second application to be considered to compete, which included recording a 1-minute video. So to tell the panel what competing and being selected would mean. I lost count of how many times I recorded that video. So in the end, I decided I'd just do it one more time and submit it. Convinced there was no chance I would be selected, I did my best to put it to the back of my mind. I'm immensely proud to say I was selected to represent Team UK at the 6th Invictus Games in Dusseldorf. The Games took place between the 9th and 16th of September 2023. We had just under 6 months to prepare between selection and competing. so I put in a lot of hard work in between training camps. Listening to music has helped me through my journey. Some of the lyrics in the songs Unstoppable by Sia and This Is Me Trying by Taylor Swift, I think are quite relevant to living with BEHÇET'S. I didn't actually have any aspirations of winning medals. My aim was just literally to complete all the events I was entered into. I actually won my first gold medal in the first race, 1500 metre wheelchair race, which was surreal, just completely blew my head. I then went on to win 2 more gold medals in wheelchair racing and 2 silver medals in hand cycling. So over the 8 days, I actually achieved far more than I imagined possible. Even though I have BEHÇET'S, it hasn't stopped me finding a way to continue playing sport. And there are actually so many adaptive sports I didn't even know existed. If my story has inspired you, you can find a wealth of information about accessible and inclusive sports on the Sport England website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. That was really, really inspiring. What a wonderful story. Thank you. So, let's get into the next one. Whether you enjoy the buzz of physical activities like Claire or prefer something a bit more creative and relaxing, all of these play an important role in supporting well-being. The most important thing is to get out there and do it. Try something new to see what works and fits into your lifestyle. As one of our London patients, Jonathan, says, there is always something you can do. Jonathan was a master woodcarver for many years until the implements and chisels became too heavy for his hands. He never painted before, but decided to take up a watercolor challenge he saw on TV. And then look at this amazing piece he's done here. It's called The Farmyard. And that's one of his wood carvings that he used to do. So I really like that. We also have another patient called Alex. And Alex says painting really suits his needs as there's always something new to discover. Alex is a very talented artist who paints and exhibits worldwide. Just wanted to show you some of the more creative hobbies people can do. And back to sports. This is Daisy. And Daisy says, I've never participated in so many new sporting activities since having been diagnosed with BEHÇET'S disease. Here's a picture of her in the French Alps, sit skiing, where she says she's tried that for the last 2 years, and each time she tries harder and becomes bolder. And then there is a picture of Daisy wall climbing at our BEHÇET'S UK Family Fun Day. So I just think it's amazing. She says she's tried so many new activities. So I know there are many of you out there who all are already involved in sports and other types of hobbies and activities. And I love reading the inspirational stories in the newsletters when members share what they've been up to. So if you'd like to build on something new or something you've done in the past, there are many resources available to help. So please have a look at our website for more information and signposting. And I just wanted to end again on this quote, very simple, but very powerful. Well, there is always something you can do. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce Professor Graham Wallace. As I said, he's coming in from online. I think we're good to go, Martin, are we? Do I need to press anything else or no? I just leave.
As I said, I was asked to do an update on the sort of scientific research that's gone on over the past year in relation to BEHÇET'S disease. So next slide, please. So this was actually quite a provocative title in the first place. Can we cure BEHÇET'S syndrome? Now, normally I wouldn't worry too much about a paper like that, but when you look at the authors, that's Hasan Yazici, who for 40 years has been running the BEHÇET'S Center in Istanbul, and is one of the leaders in the field. Gulam Hatemi is the executive command and very much another major leader. And Yusuf is his son. And Yusuf, again, is a fine researcher in his own right. But what they were doing, I've taken some notes just really from this paper, but they said they considered the attempts to lump Behçet's syndromes with other conditions has not been helpful. So we've talked in the past about this concept of MHC class 1 opathies. So in other words, other diseases which also have a class 1 association like Behçet's. But this idea that linking them together is going to tell us something more doesn't seem to be the case. And that basically to understand Behçet's better, we need to be splitters rather than lumpers. So we're not lumping together lots of diseases, but actually taking Behçet's in its own right. The next slide, please. So to this end, we urgently well-designed studies to advise us for how long we should continue to treat Behçet's and any one of other medications that are currently in use. And this is actually really the take-home message I think that we have to move forward with now, is to do really large-scale proper studies in terms of looking at patients with Behçet's disease. When you hear the stories from the likes of Hannah and Clare today, you realize, they have to go through a lot of different drugs and different troubles and different problems about what's going on. We're still not in that situation where we know which drug is going to be best for which individual and for which manifestation. And we need to be thinking of trials along that line. The next slide, please. And they're ending this saying that this is something that Farida mentioned as well, the different effects of being male or female in this disease course is something that we really need to take into account. So we need to make our clinical trials when we do set these up to make sure that we've got a proper mix of the patients that actually have Behçet's disease. We have to have the same number of males and females, for example. Farida also mentioned ethnicities, and that's something else that we need to consider. And the only way in which this can really be done is to get the funding to do studies which are large enough to have enough patients in there that we can then start to use them as subsets and to decide what's going on. So this is it's a very interesting paper from a very esteemed field. Unfortunately, there's no definite answer at the end of it, and even more unfortunate, the answer is not yes, definitively. But I think that what they're actually setting out is how we move forward from here and what kind of studies we need to set up with regards to answering some of these questions in Behçet's. Next slide, please. So one of the other aspects that we have with any clinical trial or any study that we're doing is to have a readout system. And this is a paper looking at a method just calling the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio. And we know that this alters in various diseases. And what we're really seeing at the top there are some of the stimulus that may be involved in driving this process. The grey cell on the left is a T cell producing IL-17. That's known to draw neutrophils into the blood and also leading to their activation and things like netosis. So understanding the links between these by looking at this ratio is something which has been looked at in this study and it has been considered in other studies as well. Next slide, please. The downside of this in one sense is that there are strengths. It's easy to do. It gives you a number at the end of this that you can follow through. Unfortunately, it does lack specificity. And there's sort of limited effects in terms of what you can do for particular diseases. And there's no standardized cutoff values. And this is another issue that we need to consider going forward for clinical trials, is what do we use as a readout? Something like this obviously can be measured and we can take that, but is that telling us, what we actually need to know? We've obviously got things like the BD-CAF and the quality of life study questionnaires that we can use. There are other readout systems that we need to consider as being relevant to how we actually decide whether this drug is working or not in a particular manner. And this is something that is going to be very important of actually having in those clinical trials before we actually send them off for funding. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give you a short tutorial on immunology. So basically, under normal circumstances, your body, your immune system is tolerant to your own body. So normally your immune system does not attack the proteins and so forth in your body. Most of that happens in the thymus in fetal life, where any autoreactive T cell that's got a high recognition of self is eliminated. So by the time you're born, you've got a set of T cells that can recognize self, but at a low level in terms of what's happening. Next slide, please. There's also a concept called peripheral tolerance. And this is when you have a challenge. So you have an infection or whatever. You want to have an increase quickly of T effector cells. And these are the cells that will help to come in and deal with a bacteria or a pathogen and help to kill it and clear it. But you also, at the same time, generate a population of regulatory T cells, which recognize the same virus or the same bacteria, and they help to control your effector cells. Now, without the regulatory cells, these individuals who have the problems with this, they will have autoimmune diseases from a very early age and will not last much longer than their early teens. And in fact, the process of generating these regulatory T cells was in the news last week because 3 of the people who identified the molecules involved and the cells involved, they won the Nobel Prize for medicine as far as this is concerned. But there's another aspect to this. In these T regulatory cells, they have all 3 chains of the receptor for IL-2, including a molecule called CD25, which is the high affinity chain. Next, please. So what has been trialed, and I'll show you some data from this, treating patients with low doses of IL-2 will preferentially stimulate regulatory T cells and downregulate the immune response. Now, obviously, because they've got the high affinity receptor, that means that they're able to respond better to low levels of IL-2, and those low levels will not actually target the effector cells. Effector cells respond to IL-2 as well, but they need higher levels to be able to do that, which is what happens at the start of immune response. When you get to the lower levels of it, then the regulatory T cells take over and they help to control everything. So taking that information, there have been various studies looking at low-dose IL-2 in a series of conditions. So next slide, please. So this is a study that came out a couple of years ago, specifically in BEHÇET'S. They looked at a study from China. They looked at a large number of patients, 177, and healthy controls. And they tested the efficacy and safety of low-dose IL-2. Next, please. So just in general, in these patients, there was a decrease in the absolute number of T regulatory cells, and in fact of IL-10, which is a molecule that's produced by T regulatory cells in these patients. Whereas there was no difference in the effector T cell populations, which are classified as Th1, 2, and 17. So there's a normal number of effector cells in these patients, but a lower number of T regulatory cells. Next, please. And the ratio of T17 to regulatory cells in patients was actually higher. There was more T17, as we say, than in healthy controls. And the circulating Treg levels were negatively correlated with various other markers like C-reactive protein, which is something that we measure as a marker of inflammation. So in these patients, we're seeing a decrease in the number of effector T cells compared to healthy controls. Next, please. After IL-2 treatment, all the subsets increased to some degree, but only Tregs were amplified more dramatically, a fourfold increase. So though all of them responded in some way, you're getting a much larger Treg response, and there are more T regulatory cells which are increased and bring it back up to the normal level that we could see as far as that's concerned. Now, it has to be said that the question exactly of what T regulatory cells would be doing in Behçet's disease is still not clear. We don't regard Behçet's as an autoimmune disease, more as an autoinflammatory condition, but it may be related to this link with the Th17 cells. And having more T regulatory cells means that you can control the Th17 cells better. That means less neutrophils, less damage to tissue, less vasculitis. Next, please. Symptoms were mitigated without any side effects in these individuals. And BD, as I say, may be triggered by a defect in immunotolerance with these decreased Tregs. And low-dose IL-2 may be one method for bringing the number of Tregs back up to normal and promoting some sort of remission. Now, there was no real discussion in this publication about what effect it had on the disease. This was mainly about the cell populations. Next, please. So this is another study that was done more recently, and this is what they call a basket study. So basically, you take patients with lots of different diseases that are generally maybe have a similar profile, and put them all into the study at the same time. So rather than trying to find 177 Behçet's patients, they've taken a series of patients with similar forms of disease. And in this case, we had 8 patients with Behçet's disease. Next, please. And they were put onto levels of low-dose IL-2. And what you can see here in the top left, this is an increase in the number of T regulatory cells. And you can see that whatever the form of IL-2 that was used, you were getting an increase in that early stage in the first week. And then that fell off again. And again, looking at the profiles for the top right and the bottom left, then again, you're seeing an increase in the numbers. And that's total within the populations. If you look at the figure that's in the bottom right, Behçet's disease is actually the ones on the far right. And as far as those patients are concerned, all of them raised the numbers of Tregs in response to this treatment. So again, this shows that we can increase T regulatory cells within patients with Behçet's disease where there may be a defect in the first place. Next, please. And this is just showing the number of responders to non-responders. There's various ways in which they defined this. But this was, Behçet's has given a very good response here, and that the majority of these patients are giving you some level of response in terms of treatment with low-dose IL-2. So this may be something that we want to take further. Low-dose IL-2 is a relatively, and as we understand it, safe treatment because it doesn't really drive the T effector cells, which could cause problems. We'd have to understand more about what we think the T regulatory cells may be doing in Behçet's disease, but that is something that could be factored in. And as we say, if we're looking at the idea of possible treatments to use in a larger scale trial that we could actually implement across the 3 centres, taking the patients that we want to deal with in this and have the right proportions of patients, as we say, of males and females, and also looking at the different manifestations, then this may well be a drug treatment that's worthwhile that we consider taking forward. Next slide, please. And this is just another study that's been done with this drug called rofimilast. This affects a molecule called the PD4, PD inhibitor, and there's another drug out there called apremilast, which has been used in Behçet's as well to target this same sort of pathway. But this is looking at the effects of oral ulcers, and as you can see in these studies, it actually brings down the numbers of oral ulcers quite substantially, and the data was certainly, reasonable for what we're looking at. Now, it doesn't say anything about targeting other aspects of manifestations of Behçet's, which is something that we'd have to consider going forward. But again, this may be another drug that could be useful in dealing with oral ulcers. And as Farida will always tell us, if you can deal with the ulcers in the mouth, you can potentially deal with the other aspects of Behçet's going forward. So this is something, again, that we have to have a look at. The apremilast data, which came out a few years ago, again looked very promising, but it doesn't seem to have really taken off and gone into the clinics, as far as I can understand. And we may need to, think about why that is. But this, again, may be another drug that could go into the arsenal for dealing with oral ulcers, at least. So that's just a few things that have come out over the past few months. But as I say, I think we need to sit down at this point, particularly because we have got this vast amount of data on the patients in the 3 centres. We need to then start trying to devise proper clinical trials, ideally randomized controlled trials, which give you the best evidence for this. And, to deal with the various aspects that we've talked about, getting enough patients in there to make it worthwhile, having proper controls, which is another aspect that's discussed in the paper by the Yazicis. The correct mix of patients, in other words, what are we actually looking for? Certainly male and female. We need to look at this within the ethnic bounds of the patients that we see in the UK. And then the other aspect, of course, I mentioned briefly, is this: what is going to be our readout system? Are we going to use something like the BDCAF scoring system? Are we going to use something else? That needs to be decided up front as to what's the best way to say that these drugs are being effective as far as the patients are concerned. And then, of course, there's other aspects that we could look at linking to this. The microbiome has been mentioned briefly. We could, of course, take microbiome samples, either oral or fecal, over the course of any study that we're doing to see whether we're altering the microbiome and whether that may have an impact on what is happening going forward. So there's lots of possibilities and lots of potential. What we need to do now, of course, is to get the money to do these studies and do them properly. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we're going to invite the medical professionals up to the front to take questions.
I took a question earlier.
Have we got
Somebody was here, but
Yeah.
then it's gone now. And he was talking about one of the medications he was on, and he started to notice that different versions of it were affecting him, and he was having different sort of symptoms as a result. So it was, in theory, the same product, but it had different stuff in it.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. So the different products, it's because the active ingredient is the same, but it's the excipients, the carriers in the product, which are not the same. We used to make all our own drugs in this country, and now we make almost none. As you know, when we had Brexit, the European Medicines Agency, which we led here in the UK, the American agency, the Japanese, and quite a few others, all moved out. We now have great difficulty with sourcing drugs that are reasonable price, because we're not in the EU, so we're not in that huge market where they can bid for a contract and bid for the drugs to be cheaper. So that is one of the problems. So the problem we have that drugs are now being sourced much more widely. So the cheaper the excipient, the cheaper the drug, right? So quite frequently, drugs are now filled with quite a lot of lactose, and loads of people are allergic to lactose. So they were taking, say, their clopidogrel, which is one of the anti-clotting agents, for years and years, and suddenly get tummy pains and can't tolerate it. So that's the problem with the different products, even though it's the same drug. Do you want to add anything?
No, that's absolutely correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? So shall I read some of the questions? Yeah?
Question.
Yes?
We always talk about mouth ulcers.
Yes.
And doctor, have you got any experience with people with ulcers in the nostrils, up in the nose?
In your nose?
Yeah.
You have ulcers in your nose. You don't tend to get that with BEHÇET'S. They tend to be associated with vesicular bullous disease. However, a patient with BEHÇET'S may get ulcers when they are using a medication which changes the bugs in your nose, your ears, or your mouth. And so that might be a cause of it. By getting as a primary symptom, mouth ulcers, nasal ulcers, you have to think of vesicular bullous disease. So somebody said, vagus nerve stimulation seems to be pushed as the new thing for reducing stress and inflammation. Does the panel have a view on whether this is something worth exploring or not?
I don't think so.
No.
I saw these reports. I
No.
don't think it's there's any point in.
Yeah, I totally
pursuing that.
agree with Prof. Jawad because vagus nerve stimulation on a very simple scale, what happens when you have a faint? It's overstimulation on the vagus nerve, right? So what the vagal nerve stimulators are selling is saying, actually, if we stimulate the nerve, it will be anti-inflammatory. The vagus nerve is usually for immediate responses. It does go to other areas, but sometimes when you cough or because the vagus nerve runs down here, so I think they are selling it and saying put the stimulator up here. But I think you can run into huge problems. So somebody thinks do it. There's always a placebo effect in all these things, 50% placebo effect. So you're using it, you think it does really well, and so you turn it up. So can you see, if you overstim your vagal nerve, at the extreme, you can die. So I wouldn't use it, because you're slowing down your heart rate. So, yeah.
Absolutely, that is absolutely correct, yes. It's very dangerous.
Okay.
As Houdini used to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So can I just give to someone else? Hang on, there's another one coming. Okay, so this is about using some of these new apps in watches, etc. Could fatigue link to heart rate being high when patients are flaring with BEHÇET'S? So would a wearable help Fitbit or Apple Watch linked to a free app like MyFitness be a quick and cheap way to do? Cheaper than doing a PhD. So now Sarah is doing her PhD.
So in terms of the link between fatigue and heart rate, I'm not sure if they're directly related, but fatigue is common An increased heart rate can be due to many, many things, common ones being stress, dehydration, but if you've got a persistently raised heart rate, you probably need to see your doctor about it, and that may not be related to BEHÇET'S. In terms of wearable technology, there's so many things out there, Apple Watches, Fitbits, Whoop bands, they all give varying levels of data. It might be helpful to you if you'd like to use the wearable tech and keep a diary, but it will pick up variations which are not always helpful. Some of them may be helpful, but you can always collect that information and share it with your doctor.
I still wear my 51-year-old long jeans. It's very reliable. It doesn't need a battery, and it's elegant.
One thing that I actually only noticed a couple of weeks ago is that the Apple Watch now picks up other things which could be useful, such as your walking variability. It detects how you walk and whether you limp. So that might be helpful in someone who's got a neurological problem or other health problems.
But I would say just be careful with quite a lot of the wearables. One famous brand, so I'm an immunologist allergist, yeah? So one famous brand is now found to have contaminants in the plasticizer in the watches and wearables, which are inflammatory triggers. So I would be just a bit careful with it. Perhaps a cheaper wearable would not. But I think all the new materials that are coming out now are using more and more compounds in it that we wouldn't have used before. And if it's a wearable, you don't go through the same test you have as if you're giving somebody a medication. Just give it to the floor. What do you think? Yeah. So,
can I say a couple of things? Because I think let's make it more lively. I think one of the problems, my younger brother is a psychiatrist, is an academic psychiatrist. And when we were looking at, in a way, the problems of chronic diseases, especially BEHÇET'S, and in essence, there are two problems with BEHÇET'S. One, it's a very painful condition. We always say, well, BEHÇET'S is recurrent mouth and genital ulceration. We forget the painful bit. It's recurrent mouth and painful. We forget the painful bit. And the pain is very severe, and the pain itself could produce all sorts of other physiological problems. That's number one. Number two, the problem with BEHÇET, it's unpredictable. Today, we're very happy, we're joking, but tomorrow morning we wake up and the mouth is full of 20 ulcers. It's the unpredictability. I mean, you're happy today, you're comfortable, you slept very well, you wake up the following day, and it is. So I think these are, we forget the pain, and the pain itself could trigger other pains. It triggers the tachycardia, the feeling tired, the tiredness, that may give you a headache, that makes you feel unwell, and so on. And that the apprehension of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow, I think it makes you live on edge. It's the painful bit we forget. The other point I wanted to make, because talking about back in 1981, when Mrs. Thatcher was Prime Minister, the Royal College of the government before that asked Sir Douglas Black, who was the president of the Royal College of Physicians of London, to produce a report to say, is there equity in health? That's 1981. And he found that, in fact, the treatment, 95% of people get the correct treatment, whether they are in Skegness or Brighton or London or Birmingham. However, even if you take the various variables, if you are poor from social class 4 or 5, you will not do well. Even if you take account to the fact they smoke, do this, do that, and the other, and people from class 1, social class 1 or 2, they always do much better. And in fact, at the time, the government, Mrs. Thatcher's government, did not print adequate copies of the report. And in fact, I mean, you'll be lucky if you could get a copy of it. But in essence, and then they repeated the last year, the COVID inquiry, published one of the reports that says, look, if you are poor, you're not going to do well. Well, we know that. Equity in health is related to equity in the way we live. So it is, I think that is, we keep forgetting that, and the best way to, in a way, to raise people from the bottom social class to higher classes is education. If you are educated, you're more likely to earn more, you will eat better, you'll probably live in a better housing, and so on. And I'll shut up now.
No, that's absolutely right, but it's the Marmot report. And he's at UCL, and when he published the original report, he's repeated it, and it's been repeated again. And I usually give a lecture on social inequity and health. You know, the 90%, okay, who have nothing, it's actually 86%, and the 1% that control almost over 90% of the wealth. And then you look at the world, there's something called the Brandt line, which he was a German chancellor. And below that, almost all the inequity lies. But then if you look at other countries, so in the UK, we have people who are very, very wealthy and people who are as poor as the poorest people below the Brandt line, right? And that is the most important thing, because if you can't eat, if you can't wear proper shoes to go to school, if you can't afford to pay for the heating on when it's cold, whatever I give you is not going to help. Right? And there's lots and lots. And as I say, as I usually do this big talk, and I was abroad, and this country wanted their name taken off to show it's, but most people, 86% of the people control less than 10% of the wealth, even if you take the whole world. And in the UK, so I'm in London, are we rich? We've got 4 of the poorest boroughs in the whole of the UK in the East End of London. People have nothing, right? So that's the most important driver for health. So if I was the government, I'd have more the schools, but they have done quite a good job with the schools over the last 10, 15 years. But please, reintroduce things of like free milk at school, all right? Give people an orange at school. Okay, when I was younger, I was born in South Africa. All the food came to the UK after the war. And so for the next, I think, 20 years, we didn't have fresh eggs or whatever. But we all had cod liver oil over the winter. Yeah? And, but it had loads of vitamin D, which you needed. And we have an orange and something fresh, and we had some milk at school. If they do that, if you feed those poor children coming to school, they can concentrate. And education is the driver for prosperity, and as Prof. Jawad says, for health. So should we go to the next one? It says compliance is impacted by access getting through to the GP surgery, app, phone, internet, being able to walk, drive to the pharmacy, stand in the queue, and afford the prescription. We need easier setup for repeat prescriptions, better GP shared care, I agree, and responsiveness, etc. How could we achieve that with local GP service, interacting with the service of the CE? Very important question. Do you want one of you take it? Yeah. Okay.
I think we probably need Nardos here for this one as well. But
Oh, yes.
I'll take it.
Nardos, I thought you were sitting here.
Yes, we know from the London Centre it can be difficult to obtain prescriptions from the GP sometimes, but we also understand that the GPs are totally overwhelmed. You all know how long it takes to get an appointment, have to hold on the phone or do an online form. We have the same difficulty in getting through to them. We have to pick up use the same phone to get through. What we do have at the London Centre, which I'm not sure about all the other patients in the room and online, but we have an email system and we are happy to arrange prescriptions for our patients who are struggling. And we are trying to improve as well how we, to try and be able to post prescriptions to local pharmacies. And then the pharmacies themselves, a lot of pharmacies are now arranging home deliveries. So that's something you can look into if your mobility is not great. But do have a chat with your doctors and pharmacies to see if there's anything they can do to support you if you are struggling. Shared care as well we do offer, but again, that relies on the GP having the time to do your blood tests and give the prescription.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. We do recognize that sometimes can be a struggle. And one thing that we will try to implement is what we call the electronic prescription service. So this is where from the hospital, the pharmacy, the prescription will be sent straight to the local pharmacy. And this will make the life of our patient much easier because they will avoid traveling to London, waiting in queue in our trust pharmacy. So it's something we are trying to implement, at least in the London Centre, because we recognize this is a problem.
Okay, so just to say that we did implement it, pharmacists stopped it because it was £300 for us to implement, to send to the local pharmacy. However, what we do have, and I think that you can have, is that your doctor, okay, has an arrangement with the local pharmacy. And especially with the BEHÇET'S patients, you're on repeat prescriptions. On the high-cost drugs, okay, so all the disease-modifying drugs, we usually have shared care. And the shared care is at the beginning of the use of the drug, the patients will come in, we will do the tests. When everything is sorted, then the GP will take over care. So I think there are things we can do, and I think there are things we can do with the patient organization to try and push that forward. I can see from patients when they're not feeling well and they need medication, they actually can't get up and go and collect it. So I think that's something that we and the patient organization should work on, taking into account also the fiscal problems of the NHS. So things like we used to send these quite frequently to patients. It's now in the exception. We also have home care. If you're having a biologic drug and you're self-administering, so we're trying to increase the number of those as well.
Yes, I've got a couple online, Farida, please. So I've been advised in Ukraine about using a medication that is also prescribed for lupus. I believe it's an immunosuppressive injection, possibly cyclophosphamide. Could you please clarify if this treatment is ever used for BEHÇET'S, and what are the long-term reproductive or fertile risks? Are there any alternative treatments for severe BEHÇET'S cases that do not carry infertility risks?
Okay, so we've had a few patients. From the Ukraine who've had other disease-modifying drugs. They do have biologics. They seem to be able to access them quicker than we do, right? Cyclophosphamide is a fantastic drug. And before we had the biologics, we would use this for severe BEHÇET'S. It has to be done under hospital supervision if you're giving someone cyclophosphamide. Also, if you're giving it to a young man with severe uveitis and there isn't anything else, you have to discuss both with the patient and the family because it may have effect on the patient's sperm. So cyclophosphamide although it's a lifesaver, it also have lots of side effects.
Yeah, that is correct. In fact, it has a lot of. It should really not be
used
routinely. I think it's, but at times, in patients with certain complications, certainly severe vascular disease or brain involvement, because it works very quickly. But we tend to prefer to give the biologics. The infliximab could well be equally as quick, but if the patient has already not responded to infliximab, then we escalate to that. But it's a lot of side effects with cyclophosphamide, long term as well.
And you would only use it for severe disease, so severe, rapid eyesight loss and neurological disease. So frequently, if they can't get hold of a biologic very quickly to infuse, they will use cyclophosphamide. It's a fantastic drug, but not for use by everyone. Sorry. Okay, there is a question about vaping, I think. Is it? No. Prof. Fortune talking about illicit drugs, cannabis, etc. What about the massive increase in nicotine exposure to vaping, especially in young people? How does that impact on BEHÇET'S? So I think there's two things. The illicit drugs, which the person obviously took to heart, and now saying, but other people are using vaping. Vaping is not a good idea, whether you've got BEHÇET'S or not. So we've seen patients with what's called popcorn lung of vaping, okay? Literally, we look at the lung and it's full of these popcorn areas, which will result in prolonged long-term problems with degeneration of it's the little areas where you exchange blood, the bronchioles, and they become bigger and bigger, and then they become ineffective. So that's one of the things. But I've noticed, because London is like vaping, and they also use shisha, you know, these smoking pipes. And you just have to walk past Edgware Road, and there's hundreds of young people using, is it shisha? Shisha. And the thing that bothers me is it's tobacco, but there's also a lot of these added flavorings and colors. So from my point of view, and the allergy side, almost the basis of almost all the allergic responses starts with a reaction to perfume and flavors. So you know when you go into Marks and Spencer's and you smell wonderful cinnamon, that's synthetic. Sainsbury's is roast chicken, that's synthetic. Okay, so the flavor and the chemical are absolutely the same, and they are highly allergenic. So you have people using something that's carcinogenic in the shisha, using them with these colors and things, and then there are other additives to them as well, which, so it's not a good idea. It looks good when you're out with your friends, but go and do something else that's nice. So I'm going to ask Prof. Jawad, who might have had shisha when you were younger.
No, I've never smoked in my life. Never, ever. But the problem with vaping and with shisha, it's the minute particles that one inhales. It's not just a vapor. It's the minute particles that goes into the lungs, and they get engulfed by these macrophages, and they could induce inflammation and later destruction of the fine spongy bit of the lung. And if you look at the shisha, where obviously they put the charcoal on top plus the nicotine, and then it goes through there is water underneath because it bubbles through and if you look at the water there, it begins colorless, and then it looks like tar.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine some of it is going into the lungs, and unfortunately, it's really bad news. So even vaping is dangerous because it's the particles that you inhale.
Okay, and so there's a question is, what's the difference between folliculitis and pseudofolliculitis? So on a basic thing, folliculitis is when you have irritation or inflammation, and you're more likely to get that in Behçet's. So where you have lots of hair under your arm, on your pubic area, that's where you'll get folliculitis. And some men are very hairy, and their shirts rub their back, and that's where. But pseudofolliculitis, it's when there's infection associated with it, all right? So it's usually a bit of bacteria or fungus, and then you'll get pseudofolliculitis. Yeah? Okay, then the last one is, how does sugar in your diet impact on gut exactly? Is it butyrate or any specific diet we should follow in trying to reduce Behçet's flares? Now, do you remember me giving you a talk about diet? Yeah. And what did I say? I gave you a plate of food. And for you, you are British, you were born, your ancestry is here in this country. You need a plate of food that your mother gave you when you went to school and came home. What did it have on it? Okay, it had almost half a veg. Then there was potatoes. I remember when I was at boarding school, there wasn't rice. Okay, then there was potatoes, and then there was a bit of protein. Yeah, that's very good. Don't go for fancy things, okay, because when you go out of your environment, you then get to use foods that your gut is not used to. So I would say that, and butyrate, sugar in your diet. Since the Second World War, we've by about 6,000 increased the sugar in our diet. Okay, has any of you eaten anything today without sugar? No. Okay, so, and the sugars that they're using now are becoming cheaper and cheaper. So there was cane sugar, and that would come from the colonies, right? So in West Indies, in Southern Africa, and in Asia, they'd grow loads and loads of cane sugar, and it would come here. So you had one sugar. Now, the main sugar they're using is fructose. And fructose is much more complex, and it also induces an allergic reaction. So you'll find some people that come sort of northern Iraq, they've got fructose intolerance, and so these wonderful sweets, which used to have honey over them, is now fructose syrup. And so they're getting more and more gut problems with it. So just be careful of the sugars that you use. I think that's important. But the microbiome, because I'm after asking about butyrates, your microbiome will produce the sugars that you need. So it doesn't only depend on the cane sugar that you're putting, but the sugar that's naturally in the fruits and the vegetables that you eat. So if you eat more fruit and vegetables, you'll get the good sugars. You know, if you eat a lot of chocolate, I like chocolate, and try and confine those other sugars, and these synthetic sugars in loads of other things aren't good for any of us. But that's the gut. And I would say, as Graham says, actually it's the microbiome in your mouth, and for that you need to make sure that your oral health is perfect. And we also had a bit about teaching. People think cleaning your teeth is easy. You go, dog, dog, dog. But actually, it's quite complex. And having oral problems give you the most pain and the most time off work. Right.
We've literally just got 5 more minutes, so there's a couple of questions. The first one is to do with COVID vaccination. Are you still recommended COVID vax if offered? I get very ill and weak from flu and COVID vax, so feel reluctant to get both. And then there's another quick one. Why are GPs insisting on monthly blood tests for mycophenolate, for example? Getting to the blood tests is often a problem.
Okay, so I think for those drugs, the blood test is very important because 6-MP, mycophenolate, and azathioprine are metabolized in the liver, right? And we want to make sure that the dose of it isn't affecting your liver function. So if you need the blood test, you need to have it done. And we won't, for instance, give you your infusions if you don't have your blood test of your DMARD that you're taking. And the doctors won't give you a re-prescription, because if you don't have it monitored and you suddenly turn up months later and have severe liver disease, you'll blame the doctors, but actually it could have been reverted. What was the first question?
COVID, yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, go and have your COVID vaccine. I went to have my flu and I tried to get COVID and they said, you can't. You're not old enough to have it done. So that was quite good. Some saying, yeah. So, but I've just seen for people who are immunocompromised, so your group, the government has just put out the letter that will go out to you. I would say, have your flu jab and have your COVID jab. That's what saved us not losing a life in COVID, all right? Now, I know patients say, oh my God, if I get it, I feel unwell for a day. You're hyperinflammatory. You don't get flu over the winter, all right? What it's doing, it's triggering your immune response. And I always say, the bigger it is, the better it is, because the better protection you will be getting, all right? If you have an allergic reaction, no, all right? But that would be sorted out with your doctor. And can I also say, besides that, we have found, we've got some research which we need to publish, which Azimur, NADOS, everyone knows, is that you may be more likely to get pneumonia. So the pneumonia organisms got 14 places where it latches on to the cell. So we all have antibodies because naturally, and Behçet's patients can have this 24 sites. And Behçet's patients, 14 sites, and Behçet's patients can have up to about 8 of them not responding. So from my point of view, you need to have the pneumococcal vaccine as well. And as Dr. Jawad would tell you, as you get older, you should get your herpes zoster vaccine.
Zoster shingles vaccine as well.
That's fantastic, Farida. Here's an important one, I think. We've literally got a couple of minutes. Biologic biosimilars. Is there any situation where patient should not move to biosimilar? Is any data being gathered on BD patients' responses to biosimilars? Are there any indicators which may suggest the patient return to original formula?
Yeah, so it's exactly the same to the biosimilar. It is exactly the same formulation, right? But again, as excipients might be different. When we tried with one, the Behçet's patients had quite a lot. Nadas, which biosimilar is that they all had? Which one? Yes, with the biosimilar to adalimumab, yeah. The first one that came out,
It's no longer available.
Yeah, it's no longer available. We had lots of patients who had allergic reactions. The biosimilars are getting better and better. And so they're supposed to be exactly the same. They're much cheaper, and the efficacy is the same. But we would collect data, so we haven't yet in our center swapped patients over. Then the other thing is the level of the drug and antibody production. So we monitor that, right? And if you're not getting adequate levels, you can decrease the time between giving it, or if you're getting an abnormal response, then we would take you off and put you back to the original. But I have to tell you that all the centers have been instructed to change over. But we will be careful, and I know that other centers are as careful as we are in the monitoring of patients, and we do collect data. If you come into the center, you'll know we're always asking you to fill in forms, and we collect all the demographic and other data. It's all anonymized, and Azimun sitting at the back there is in charge of the database. It's all anonymized, and then Amal is the data analyst, so we frequently have research meetings looking at the trends, and if there's anything we're worried about, we will put it out there.
Okay.
Nope, that's fine.
That's brilliant, Farida. Thank you so much. If everyone, I think, could give a round of applause for the question. It's really well answered. And I'm conscious we'll be chucked out at past. So I've got a couple of things to say. There are a couple of questions that haven't been answered. We'll get the answers, and then we'll just email to everybody, because some are anonymous. We're not sure who asked them, okay?
Can I just say one thing? People have been asking about Traorasol. If you go and just email on to the London BEHÇET'S Centre, it's on the website, and then write for the attention of Dr. Sacoor. She'll send you all the details of how you can get it locally. We will work with your GP, or how, if you near, you can pick it up through the pharmacy. Okay?
Real.
Thank
you. Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, great. Literally got 3 minutes. Okay, so it's time to close proceedings, and I won't take too much of your time, obviously, for that. I believe we've had another fantastic, informative conference, and I need to offer some thanks on your behalf. But first, as a reminder, as the slide notes, for those here in Reading, please place your feedback form on the admin table at the back of the room, and for those, or maybe on the way out actually, and those online, please complete the online link in the chat, which we will email again after the session. It's most important for us to shape this conference to meet your needs in future. It's not what we think, it's what the patients think. So we need your views, what worked, what didn't, and so forth. Please hand in your lanyards and badges as well as you leave. So on my list of thanks, first to Aston Media for a highly professional way you've managed our event once again. I think this is the fourth one now. So thank you, Martin and Harvey, for that. And also Penta Hotel, I think, have supported us well also, so thank you to them. Gemma Darlow, apologies, for your massive effort putting this together. There's an awful lot of detail in organising this. It's not inconsiderable. So could everyone show your appreciation? Next, Jan Mather's team, we're here today from the BEHÇET'S Patient Centre. So Jean Christians and Denise Lavers, thank you very much. And of course, our trustees, Alan, Judy, Amanda, Catherine, and news editor, Clare Griffith, who will be kindly writing up the proceedings afterwards, and especially for Rachel as Master of Ceremonies today. And then, of course, Professor Farida Fortune and her team from the London Centre. Thank you so much for giving up your valuable time, both preparing presentations and attending here today over the weekend. They are busy enough as it is, prosecuting their daytime jobs. Also online, Graham Wallace, and indeed online with the Q&A, Professor Phil Murray, thank you, from Birmingham, and also Megan Rutter from Birmingham. So please show your appreciation to the big team. Our two patient advocates, Hannah Twinbarrow-Hurst, who who kindly pre-recorded her presentation, and Clare Gibson, present here today. Thank you so much for your important contribution. It was amazing and illuminating and vital to hear the patient voice. Finally, thanks to all of you present here today for taking the time and effort to be here. Our members and non-members joining online, international participants, and indeed clinicians and healthcare practitioners. This conference is all about serving you, and I trust we've done justice to that today. I'd like to thank Joanna Zeiss, who's online. I mentioned her last year. She's from the US. She's a patient, but actually she's written 3 books on BEHÇET'S, and she helps us a lot when we get questions from abroad, and I fire them in the direction of Joanna, and she answers the questions. So, without further ado then, for those of you here in Reading, have a safe journey home, and if driving, take a special care, and we look forward to hosting you all again at our 2026 conference, which is going to be on Saturday, the 17th of October, location to be confirmed. Many thanks.